Hello and welcome to Das Reboot. My name's Stephen Jacoby and with me is...
Zachary Lyle.
Yes, we are here to talk about reboots, remakes, and adaptions. Zach, what exactly is a reboot, quote unquote, to you?
Well, a reboot to me would more than likely be the reviving of a franchise, I suppose.
Yes.
Whether it be done through a retelling of a tale, a continuation of a tale after a certain extended amount of time, or just a revisualization of a certain tale.
Yes, exactly. Which is what makes the meat of Das Reboot.
We are coming together to put these artistic visions head to head.
And then let them battle it out, decide who's the victor in the end.
And it's going to be hard to do with some of these, if you ask me, considering you've got the time jump and you've got the difference in technology during the time periods.
Mm-hmm. And it was a different time for each.
Indeed.
And so certain jokes might not live on to today's standards, and we might not even get it anymore. So, today's episode, since we're both from Michigan, we thought something close to home would be great. So, the only thing close to home really would be Detroit. And so we're going with the old sci-fi dystopian action flick, RoboCop, 1987 versus the 2014 reboot. Are you excited, Zach?
I'm going to have to interrupt you real quick and remind you that I'm originally from Ohio. However, being in Ohio, this was actually a very, very big movie.
Really?
For me and my buddies. We really enjoyed this movie considering it was kind of close to home. But since we were close to Cleveland, our big movie was Howard the Duck.
Oh, God. Let's not hope they reboot that. I think they...
Speak for yourself. I kind of want to see that.
Oh, you goddamn Ohioans. You guys are weird. You and your flat land and Cedar Point.
What's wrong with Cedar Point?
Nothing, actually.
We're getting off topic here.
Yeah, we are. We're digressing very much. Anyways, RoboCop 1987 versus RoboCop 2014. Zach, you want to start us off with 1987 version?
I suppose I can start us off with the 1987 version.
All right.
We start off with director Paul Verhoeven. He's also done a couple of films like Showgirls. He's known for Total Recall. Very, very ahead of his time back in the 80s, early 90s. The synopsis for the film: dystopic and crime-ridden Detroit, a terminally wounded cop returns to the force as a powerful cyborg haunted by submerged memories. Now, the thing I have about this synopsis is that there is actually a line in the movie that kind of discredits this slightly.
Uh-oh.
We have by the character Johnson. He says, he signed the release form when he joined the force. He's legally dead. We can do pretty much what we want to him. I'm sorry, pretty much what we want.
Anything to him.
Anything. So right off the bat, the synopsis kind of falls apart. The theme we have is a sci-fi action sort of film. It was done about the same time that Terminator was done. The only difference is this was more of a postmodern robot film with social satire that had real emotions behind it, whereas Terminator would be considered more of a horror movie. And I do believe we will be touching on Terminator at some point in this series, so we may hear mention of RoboCop once more.
Oh, yeah. It's all part of... It reminds me of the old 90s game, RoboCop versus Terminator.
Oh, goodness.
Now, what would happen if they made that into a film, similar to, like, Aliens versus Predator?
You know what? If you keep mentioning it in this thing, we may be seeing that in the future. Coming 2019.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how well that
now, the question is it Terminator versus RoboCop or RoboCop versus Terminator?
Oh, yeah. Like, who's the actual protagonist and who's the antagonist of those films?
Good question.
We'll see.
We will see in 2019.
All right, if it happens.
The origin we have for this story is it originally actually started out as two different concepts that eventually merged into one idea. The writers that we had, which were Ed Neumeyer and Michael Miner. They had two different ideas. One was called RoboCop, which was basically a robot police officer. Then we have Super Cop, which was a character who was in an accident and then is hooked up to an appliance that enhances his powers.
What appliance would that be?
They did not specify what appliance that was. I'm thinking a refrigerator.
Or maybe a microwave.
Maybe a microwave at the time.
Well, no, that's the
So
female
basically,
version.
you take a robot police officer, you put it into a room with a character who's gone through a tragedy and is hooked up to a microwave, and you have yourself RoboCop. Advanced.
If only if it was that easy to create these super RoboCops. Just hook them up to an appliance. It's like, oh, John took a bullet the other day. Let's hook him up to a television.
It's 2016. Things are happening, man.
Everything's becoming more smart.
Next thing you know, the iPhone will create the iHeart.
Oh, God.
Which will eventually lead to the creation of iTits.
And the best part about this, you can all download it in app form.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, isn't the future wonderful? I am blown away by it already. Much like these movies that we're reviewing today.
Indeed. As I said earlier, this was being written about the same time that Terminator was finished, so the creators of the film actually waited until their script was written before they went and saw the Terminator film to prevent themselves from trying to steal any ideas from that.
Now, I'm going to stop you right there, because I read a little ditty that said that this film was inspired by the Judge Dredd comics.
Interesting. That
Yeah.
was not in my...
So, speaking of stealing ideas, come on. However, Judge Dredd was alright.
I had not seen any, or I had not heard anything about that in my research.
Oh, okay. Well, I can source Wikipedia for that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that may just be a viewer's opinion. That may just be
No,
true.
I found it on Facebook, and you know everything's true on Facebook. All right.
So I am going to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I didn't forward that text.
Oh God. All right.
You're going to have to find a new show host.
It already took so long to find you, so come on,
Yeah.
give me a break.
For its time, it was actually considered to be just another low-budget science fiction film with a silly title.
Like them all.
And that was the thing, is that people were actually somewhat embarrassed about being on the project. They were actually sitting here being asked, what are you working on? RoboCop. So it was, even for its time, it was considered very silly, and you watch it now and you're sitting here going, well, this is silly, but don't worry, they thought about it at this time. In fact, when Verhoeven first received the script, he actually threw it away. He threw it on the ground behind him. He wasn't having anything to do with it. He said it was a piece of shit.
Wow. That amazes me, because he's so passionate about this film today.
Well, that was the thing, was that he just looked at the cover page, saw the title, thought it was garbage, and was like, I'm not having anything to do with it. It wasn't until...
Did you get it at face value? RoboCop.
Exactly.
Ooh.
But it wasn't until his wife, Martine, picked it up, read it, and said, you're an idiot if you don't want to make this movie. So he picked it up, he got to it. He was really drawn into the movie. He really liked... There was a... Spoiler alert, just in case anyone here hasn't seen this movie.
Wait for it.
Go. When he has his hand first blown off.
Yeah.
When he got to that scene, he was really drawn into it. It really spoke to him.
A hand getting blown off, and I'm in.
I would be too.
I gotta hand it to him for that.
Well, for the 80s, you have to remember, something like that wasn't really seen too much on the silver...
Silver screen?
Is that silver screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an old term, but, that's the word for it.
I'm dating myself here. All you young timers, we used to have something called the silver screen. But then we come into the production values. It was actually originally budgeted at $10 million.
Wow, that's low even considering back then.
Exactly. So very low budget film.
Yeah.
They came in just a little bit over that, but they had to mainly do location location shots due to the fact that they had no money left to use studio space.
Oops.
So, even though this is set in Detroit, most of this movie was shot in Dallas. They did have some shots in Pittsburgh for futuristic building settings.
But was any of it in Detroit?
According to them, no.
Wow.
It was made, again, since this is a futuristic film for its time, it didn't say exactly when. But for its time, they were looking for a more futuristic setting, and Dallas managed to have a lot more futuristic buildings.
Because Detroit was like on the brink of bankruptcy at that time.
Indeed.
If memory serves correctly. Now, I remember reading something about this RoboCop and how in the movie, Detroit declared bankruptcy, and that was part of the plot. And then, like, a few months later, Detroit actually declared bankruptcy in real life.
There was a lot of foreshadowing from this movie, and I guess that's one of the reasons it spoke to many people, was because it was actually happening. It was actually on the horizon, and they said, well, before this actually happens, let's bring this to light.
And then it all happened. So Paul actually told the future.
I think he's always had a foot in the future.
Oh wow!
I mean,
that's how you become successful. He's just, you have a fortune teller who can actually read the future, and then bing bam boop, profit.
Sorry, I was just thinking what my palm reader told me.
It's telling you that this show is going to be great.
I sure hope so.
Yeah. Well, anyways.
So, again, all these were mainly location shots. They had almost no studio shots. There were a couple of ones where they basically had to wrap up shooting because Orion Studios was giving them a deadline and they were coming close to it, so they had to call it a wrap. But then when they came back to the studios, they said, well, we need to do certain things like shoot this scene where Officer Murphy is brutally murdered. We're going to need plenty of special effects for that, so we're going to need studio space so we can accommodate for some of these special effects that we have going on, such as puppeteering, squibs shots.
And boy, what a shot it was.
It's interesting to hear the politics that went on with this movie and having to try and sneak things under the radar. So one of the interesting things is that when I was listening to the audio commentary, they said a movie like this would have one heck of a time getting through production right now due to the fact that there's this graphic scene with a person being blown apart and people are sitting here making fun of it. And
how could you not, though? I just couldn't help but laugh during that scene. I'm a horrible person.
That's the difference of special effects between then and now, is that there's much more of a realistic feel about the way you can do something now as compared to back then, where you could almost tell things
are absolutely faked.
Exactly.
Which, it's back in the day, films had a film grain because, they were on actual film. And because of this, it made the film look a lot darker. And I think once digital and DVD started rolling around, they got rid of that. Everything was more clear. Everyone liked it better. But I felt like something was missing. It just, old scary movies didn't feel that scary anymore. Like, it just looked like more of the practical effects stood out to me as being practical effects. It wasn't real or anything. Just that little layer of film grain was just gone, and the illusion was dissolved.
As soon as you bring in the digital remastering, when you're able to sit here and tamper with the sound, tamper with the picture, take out all the little flaws that made it a classic movie, it takes away some of that magic.
It's true.
Is what happens. But one of the things you can't take away from this film is the over-the-top violence that happens in.
And that was a huge thing in the 80s.
Well, they took the violence a bit over the top to build a tension in the audience before giving them a joke.
Right.
It's a tactical ploy that they have. They feel that the bigger the tension, the bigger the laugh for the joke, which can be found in this movie. I found myself laughing many a time, sitting here, you have somebody's hand blow off, and then somebody sitting there going, whoop, oh, jeez. So it's one of those things that is backed up, but it was very popular back in the late 80s, early 90s to sit here and just kind of overdo it so that way they can draw you in a little bit more.
And boy, did it.
Indeed-a-rooney. So another interesting fact is that 80% of the casting was done in Dallas since they didn't have the money to take the entire cast from L.A. And it's interesting to hear about some of these characters getting reused in Verhoeven's future films like Total Recall, Showgirls.
I actually found a lot of like elements being reused in his films, like in the future, like the whole Ed 209 was the name of the shuttle that came and got and rescued all the people in Starship Troopers. And
you've gone the extra mile, my friend. I didn't even know that.
Actually, I'm wrong. It was actually a escape pod, like in Starship Troopers when the main ship Roger Young was destroyed and Denise Richards and whoever the hell she's paired up with are crash landing on the planet.
That's a good shout out.
It is a good shout. I love that movie. But anyways, not what we're talking about. Another element I actually did notice. Spoiler alert. Was the steel mill scene where they retreat to after the cops turn on RoboCop. I can swear it's the same steel mill that Arnold Schwarzenegger goes to in Total Recall to pull out his little nose tracking device. I swear it's the exact same one. I can't confirm that, but it just looks exactly the same to me.
We may have to investigate that later, considering
Indubitably.
Total Recall is another reboot that we can dive into. But an interesting fact about that steel mill, it's actually in Pittsburgh.
Okay, wow.
One of the reasons they really liked that is because it had a very classic City of Troy sort of feel about it. They had the big walls protecting them, and the antagonists ended up coming in and just gave it that classic feel.
Sparta feel.
Exactly.
Interesting. There's a lot of mythology that's hooked into this.
This movie has a lot of themes behind it. A lot of a lot of subtext, I guess you could read into. Many people say Frankenstein's creation.
Oh, yeah.
Frankenstein's monster.
Yep, that's a good one.
And that actually comes out in the film with some of the lines that are exchanged between RoboCop or Officer Murphy and one of the main antagonists, Dick Jones, one of the OCP executives.
That actor is always playing a dick.
Well,
in everything I see him in.
Interesting. Before this movie, he had been playing a nice guy, but all of his other roles up to this point, he had been known in television as a really nice guy.
Right. And then this was the movie.
This was his breakout role as an evil character. Mm-hmm. And he really delighted in being able to play this part, go away from his normal.
Yep.
And he went on to play the dictator on Mars in Total Recall.
Oh my God. You're so...
Mind blown.
There it went. It was so funny because...
I'm going to get you a towel.
Get some bleach while you're at it.
Wipe yourself off.
Oh my God! Yep, he's definitely typecast for the villain now. Since this movie, and it's good for him.
And it's a good thing that it happened. It's where he found himself in a new comfortable form, and all of a sudden we're sitting here going, you know what? He may be a nice guy, but when he's a dick, he's even better.
Yeah. Who knew? It's so funny. It all originated from Dick Jones,
played by Ronnie Cox.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Cox. I apologize. No more dick jokes.
We truly appreciate your work.
We really do. I mean, he did a great job in that movie. He does a great job in everything. I remember him in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where he played the captain who takes over the Enterprise, and he was kind of a hard ass in that. He technically he was a good guy, but he was still like no one liked him. Everybody wanted like Captain Picard to return back and just take back.
And that's one of the things when you stray from your normal of being a quote unquote a really nice guy, and you give yourself more depth to where you can play a nice guy that's still a dick, then all of a sudden you're a lovable character, which is interesting.
Love to hate, that is.
Exactly. It's like Miguel Ferrer in this movie plays Bob Morton, basically the guy who brings RoboCop to the streets. He was originally written as a bad guy in this movie that you would enjoy seeing killed. But anyways, Miguel Ferrer's character, Bob Morton, was originally written as a bad guy that you would enjoy seeing killed. But his interaction with RoboCop was actually it's what brought him a human factor. It's what made him a likable character, because you see him encouraging this creation. He's basically playing the father role in this, or playing Frankenstein, I guess you could say.
More Frankenstein than father, because he was kind of oddly neurotic the entire time.
Well, not so much. It wasn't until you saw his,
cocaine.
It wasn't until you saw him celebrating his success that you saw the neurotic come out.
Right.
Or when he was eventually pushed by Dick Jones, sitting here going, don't mess with me. I'm something to be reckoned with.
But as he said in the film, Dick Jones dropped the ball and I just merely picked it back up. Or one of his coworkers pointed that out to him.
Indeed.
But back to the mythology part, there is one specific instance that I am referring to that the director made. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about RoboCop Jesus.
RoboCop, American Jesus.
No, right.
When you think America,
you
think RoboCop.
RoboCop Jesus.
No, that's one of the reasons that this project stood out for him, was that he saw it as a very more modernistic, especially at the time, more modernistic telling of the Passion of Christ. He was actually quoted in saying, "You have to have the crucifixion so we can have the resurrection of Peter as RoboCop." Murphy's death scene definitely hints at stigmata. The studio is actually wanting to cut that scene.
Wow.
For the graphic violence, they're sitting here saying, you don't need it, but how else are you supposed to have the character die in such a way that brings him back to the point where when he does become conscious of himself, when he does realize that he is Officer Murphy inside this RoboCop.
But they do it so gratuitously, though. Here's the thing, though. Hold on to that thought about how he's killed in this movie compared to the one in the reboot. Just hold on to that thought, but continue.
Sorry, I'm trying to hold on to this thought. It's wriggling free.
You just can't get past the gratuitous murder of Officer Murphy.
The biggest difference is that they actually, in this movie, they have him flatline and die.
Which is amazing to me, because he would, in real life, you would have just died right there, being shot over 100 times by 12-gauge shotguns. 6 12-gauge shotguns, pumping rounds into him.
Shot through the head.
Well, that was like a single bullet.
Single bullet through the head. You've had your entire right arm blown off.
Yeah. And the best part is when they have, the trauma team, who was actually, played by real trauma people, and ad-libbing their entire dialogue, just as if it was just another day at the office, trying to resuscitate him once he's been delivered helicopter. And I'm just thinking to myself, what the hell is there to revive? This guy's hamburger meat now.
But he's still got a pulse, is the thing. You have to remember, this is a very futuristic film for its time. So they're sitting here saying that we have the technology, we can rebuild it.
Oh, God. Touché.
So, and that was actually a very fascinating scene for Verhoeven. The continuous flashbacking of his previous life being the ultimate expression of leaving Earth, leaving life, leaving everything that he's known behind, and becoming the RoboCop, which goes back to the resurrection and the whole American Jesus prophecy.
I guess Verhoeven went through a rebirth at that time, too.
I don't remember this being in the Book of Mormon, though.
It is now. like future versions. When
Let me tell
Alex
you about
Murphy.
a prophet named Alex Murphy.
Oh God, that's like so the stereotypical America gun-toting redneck today. It's all because of this damn film.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
All right, well,
But
everyone else could castrate me for that comment. I love you all, by the way.
But the biggest
I'm just
thing
into
was that
stereotypes.
the biggest thing about that scene was it was bringing a means to an end. It's basically stating that he can't return to this life anymore. He's going to have to rebuild himself. He's going to have to...
Or was it bringing a means to a beginning?
Indeed. The resurrection.
There we go.
Peter Weller, the actor that plays Officer Murphy in RoboCop, was actually given the role not only for his acting skills, but for his jawline and slim figure. They were actually afraid that if they got someone too bulky, because they kind of had their eyes on an Arnold Schwarzenegger type.
That's right. I thought they had it on Arnold Schwarzenegger, actually.
The thing that they realized is that if they got someone that was built too big for the role, the eventual armor plating, the eventual costume that was going to have to go around the actor was going to be too big, too bulky, and it was going to make the character look too hokey.
Too robotic?
Not so much too robotic, but too
bulky.
too comedic, I guess you could say.
Well, sky's the limit for this film. Come on.
If you can imagine it, too over the top.
All right. Well, it's funny you mention that because I remember reading how they couldn't get Peter Weller in and out of cars. Like they had to like cut shots while like getting into a car.
It was
never
a
you
lot
never
of
saw
good
him.
camera angles. Yeah. He couldn't get out of a car. He couldn't go upstairs. He was pantsless. Every time they shot these, he was pantsless.
You know what's funny? That pantsless RoboCop.
Because
well, technically he is pantsless.
Unfortunately, the costume, when he would try and get out of a car, when he would try and go upstairs, something about the costume made that movement make his butt wiggle. In a very...
Oh, no, we can't sexualize RoboCop now.
Well, in a very uncharacteristic way, considering he's supposed to be a solid piece of machinery.
Solid piece of meat-chinery.
One solid piece of cyborg.
Oh, yeah.
Sexiness.
Oh, yeah. RoboCop's here, and he's coming for you.
But another reason they liked him was because he took the role very seriously. He was practicing his movements before the suit was even constructed. He had his mime coach, Moni Yakin. He also brought a sense of mythic self-pity that the writers felt was necessary for this character.
Yeah, I think it was necessary in a way. I mean, you always need to have that kind of mentality for character development throughout the film. So
right.
It was needed, absolutely.
So if you notice earlier on in the movie when he's actually human, you kind of have this big-headed, scrawny sort of guy that's trying real hard to impress his son, to impress his family, and stand up for what he believes in, and then he's blown apart, and all of a sudden he's this big, hulking monster of metal, which in this movie he starts off more of a robot that finds out that he's truly a man.
Right.
Whereas in the we'll get into here eventually. In a more modern remake, it's just the opposite. He's a man that finds out he's a machine and is eventually turned into a machine that fights back to being a man.
And that's the premise of the next movie. However, before we move on to that, I just want to point out a comment you made earlier about him not being able to walk upstairs. It's so funny because there's a scene in the original RoboCop where he's battling the Ed 209, and the Ed 209 cannot go downstairs.
That would go to special effects. Special effects was... Well, actually, the most interesting thing was this was Verhoeven's first experience with major special effects. He had done no films like this previously that needed so many special effects. So he was basically doing this movie with Trial Under Fire. No experience, but he was lucky to have the connections of the producer, John Davison, who gave him great people to work with, such as Rob Bottin, Phil Tippett, some guy named Greg. I never found the last name for that. Pete Curran, Rocco Jeffrey. So these connections helped give him a crash course in special effects. And it works out pretty well in this. But the Ed 209 shots, anytime where it's standing still, it's a life-size stationary model that was put together by Craig Hayes and Paolo Lucchesi. But the movement scenes were actually miniatures done in stop motion by Phil Tippett. And that scene that you're referring to was actually very interesting, that they created this scale-to-size model of this staircase just to sit here and do the stop motion of the... Well, it wasn't quite stop motion. It was filmed of this model falling down the stairs and made it look life-size.
Well, yeah, that part wasn't stop motion, but everything else about the filming of the Ed 209 was.
As long as it was a motion shot. For the stationary shots, they actually had a life-size model to where you could go up, you could touch it.
Yeah.
So when Dick Jones is first presenting it, you see him go up and I believe he touches one of the gun turret barrels.
Yeah.
So it was able to give it a sort of realistic feel about it. And then you had it move, and all of a sudden you can see that it was ahead of its time, if you ask me.
I remember it really scaring me as a kid.
As a kid, you were sitting there and you thought it was actually happening.
Yeah.
You know, especially when it progressed into the other films and you saw little 8-year-old girl take over Ed 209, or the newest model that was in RoboCop 3.
Well, yeah, it was a scary thing. However, when it came down to like the actual sound of it, I mean, come on, it roared like a jaguar. And that was a jaguar roar that you heard.
It was actually a pig.
No, the pig, it squealed as a pig when it like went down the stairs. That was the pig squealing. But when it was actual like arming itself ready to fire, it was jaguar sounds.
And the most interesting thing is that the Ed 209 was actually based on the idea of a Huey gunship.
I can see that, actually.
So, one of the biggest things about OCP, the OCP company, was it was a reaction, basically, to Ronald Reagan's world. The privatization of hospitals, jails, police business. It's also got some undertones of Vietnam. They've got a buildup of the military-industrial complex going on. One of the scientist that works on Ed 209 is called Dr. McNamara, who is actually based off of Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during Vietnam.
Ah, there we go.
So there's a lot of little subtle influences on some of these characters. For instance, Clarence Boddicker, who's played by the wonderful Kurtwood Smith.
Hell yeah. He was my favorite character throughout the entire movie.
He's one of those characters that you love to hate. And
I really didn't hate him through this. I was just like, you go, Red Foreman.
Well, you're thinking that now, but when you're a kid...
Well, yeah, throughout the movie, I'm just like, so this is what Red was up to after Eric went to college.
Exactly.
He became a drug dealer.
Eric drove him to this. But his character's design with the glasses was actually kind of copying the German head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler.
Oh...
So you can actually see, though, you can actually see like little influences behind some of these characters.
Yeah. Makes total sense now. I'm forever going to see him as a Nazi in that film now.
All these little undertones.
It really is.
It kind of reflects a sort of Indiana Jones-esque.
Oh. And they're playing off that.
A little bit.
Oops. It's so funny. I was reading...
American Jesus versus Nazis, Take 1.
Oh, God.
Action.
That's a film. That's a film that should be like... should be shot like Kung Fury. If you ever seen that.
I have. That might be Kung Fury 2.
It's so funny. I read about the actor who plays Boddicker. He and another actor on set during the whole steel mill filming, like they get so bored during filming those scenes that they would actually start stealing the crew's golf carts and just racing them around set, and the crew would get so angry at them for it.
Well, there was a lot of tension on this set.
Really?
You know, there was many issues with certain things. Climate was another thing. Since they're in Dallas, they're sitting here filming in some locations that were actually extremely hot. It made it extremely uncomfortable for the crew to be sitting there filming for as long as they did. One of the biggest issues that we had was that the first scene shot with RoboCop was his exit out of the police station for the first time. It took Weller 11 hours to get into the costume. And then he had the issues where he had to catch the car keys as he's heading out. And since he's wearing a rubber glove, they would just bounce out.
Just bounce right off. I wonder how many shots they took.
I'm not sure. They didn't happen to say in my research, but the limitations of the robo-suit got to Weller so badly, since he couldn't move like he ideally wanted to. He had this specific vision built for this character, and he was unfortunately limited due to the special effects of this suit that he was given. So about 2 weeks into production, he was given about a 6-hour warning before he had to put the suit on for the first time. And it seemed to happen at a moment where everything was going wrong with the film. And he eventually had a psychological crisis that shut the project down for a day or two.
Was it because his ass jiggled too much?
That I can neither confirm nor deny.
It seems like that would be an issue, and everyone shooting would be distracted by that, and they just couldn't go on with their jobs. But who knows? It's one of those like little secrets that they hide forever in the shooting of that film.
The world may never know.
The world may never know.
One of the big things that brought this movie up was some of the special effects that they had. So, like when RoboCop's face is revealed to be, when it's revealed to be a disfigured Alex Murphy, the special effects makeup on his head at the time was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I mean, even to this day, you sit here and you watch it, and you have to realize that they've got this kind of helmet thing on the back of his head to make it look very mechanical, and then they have to put some sort of prosthetic makeup to make it look like his face is basically stretched over this robotic skeleton.
Yeah, that kind of gave me goosebumps.
It still gives me goosebumps to this day because it looks so realistic, and you're sitting there like looking for some flaw in it, but at the same time, it's not there.
It's not there. But that's the magic of movies.
And it's one of those things where it really built for these characters. So there's a scene towards the end of the movie where Lewis and RoboCop are sitting here interacting with each other, and it seems very slow-paced. It seems very kind of monotone, but that's something Verhoeven stressed was necessary for this movie. You know, it's not necessarily him becoming more of a man. It's more so him coming to terms with the fact that he's now a cyborg, and just basically accepting his fate. And as much as they wanted to show emotion, he's sitting here going, "No, you have to lay back. You have to keep it cool."
Yeah. You don't want to make me angry.
Exactly. You won't like him when he's angry. Verhoeven was actually very, very passionate about this work. I mean, he worked very hard with... oh, goodness. I should have looked up the pronunciation of this name. Basil Polidorus.
Oh, the composer.
The composer. Worked very hard with him in creating the score for this movie. He wanted it to be expressing emotions of each scene that ultimately made it mandatory to be in the film in order to express some of these feelings of depression without really being able to show it in the character.
That makes sense. I know a lot of film directors work with the composer in order to get the right amount of feel. I know Christopher Nolan does this with a lot of his films, like the Dark Knight series, Inception, and he usually works with Hans Zimmer. And for the recent film Interstellar, like he told Hans, like, it's time for reinvention. And what came out of that musically is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in my entire life, and I still love hearing it to this day.
It's quite the masterpiece.
Interstellar. But yeah, that theme for RoboCop, though, it's both. How can I put this? Like, it's got like sort of a march to it, you know.
That's a very, very true statement. It's got a very. I've actually heard it referred to as the RoboCop march.
Right. Exactly.
But it's got that very booming sound where
like
it sounds
Superman.
Almost like Superman. It's got kind of like an undertoning of John Williams to it, I suppose.
And as well as mixed in with the theme would be like elements of the Dragnet theme, I would say.
A little bit.
Yeah.
That would refer back to the cop.
The whole cop
genre.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes it work so well.
The movie was actually put together to classical music, and then they came in and replaced that classical music with these works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually common practice for most movie makers. They'll draft an entire storyboard while listening to their favorite composition, favorite piece of music from a composer. It's something I do too while writing my books, but it just helps you visualize, and then it gives the composer a great idea in what direction to go to. So
it's a good jumping point to sit here and be able to take it to your composer and be like, okay, I want this sort of feel behind it. I want this sort of emotion. And if you have something that's previously worked on, then you can basically say, okay, well, how can I transform this? Whereas this movie, Verhoeven, he may have had his outside influences, but he was very involved with the creation, and they spent much time on the soundtrack behind this movie.
It's a great job, I would think. It was a little cheesy, but at the same time, the entire film was campy to begin with. Like, it was gratuitous, it was campy, it was
over the top.
It was over the top. It's exactly what it needed.
And that was something that they had in concerns with filming certain scenes. So the shot where RoboCop first enters the police station, they wanted just like a very blunt reveal to go on with him. And they said, no, that's going to get too much of a laugh. People aren't going to be able to take this movie seriously. So they did this scene revealing him elliptically, to where they just slowly gave you little flashes of this character being revealed. So when he's first walking out, you see kind of a blip of him on a television screen, and then you see him appear behind this frosted glass, and then you see him from the back, and then you slowly see him in this cage. And
which is funny because I was watching a video. It's the famous Everything Wrong with this movie. And I watch it for this RoboCop movie, and they bashed it because they're just like, oh, it's not like we haven't seen him already on posters, Why are they hiding the fact of him? Well, at the same time, it was nice. It was a nice reveal, I thought. Like when he's getting turned on and everything, we see it through his eyes. We see everything, like the passing of time through his eyes in first person view, and that
we have to credit to to Jost Vacano, the director of photography on this film. Very hands-on with getting some of these great camera angles. They had some people that were quite angry with him for certain things. But for instance, the scene that you were talking about where he's first coming online, he had to actually build a camera in a chair for the constant looking up visual, which they shot in 35 millimeter and added video lines as a series of overlays to different thicknesses of lines. But he had a vision that was very much protected by Verhoeven, and he was able to sit here, get good angles, using extremely low angles to give some sort of enormous distortion for the picture. The one scene where they're blowing up the gas station, the scene that you see closest to the gas station where everything's being blown up, is actually him underneath a blanket as close as he could get to the explosion without being a casualty. And there's also the chase scene with Lewis towards the end of the movie, where she's going through that steel mill in Pittsburgh, where you see this hubcap fly off of a car and go like right over the camera.
Yeah,
that was not planned.
I wouldn't think it was.
That was not planned, and that nearly decapitated poor Yost.
Oh God!
So it was a very scary sort of shoot, but at the same time very rewarding in the end, and it was something that they could be proud of. Yost is actually also responsible, I do believe, in the picture-in-picture shots that you have when RoboCop's coming online. And it's amazing to see how, him calibrating and those popping up and showing up have led to what we expect from our technology today.
There we go.
A lot of the televisions that you have, a lot of the Microsoft Surface that I'm working on currently. I don't know if we can use that.
Oh, we'll find out. But anyways,
but you have this picture-in-picture ability that allows you to multitask, and in a situation like this, it's very essential for a machine man, an American Jesus, to be able to multitask.
Of course, that's the wave of the future, that and automation. So we gotta get with the times.
Indeed.
RoboCop Jesus has to get with the times. And it kind of did in the next film, and I think that's what we should talk about next. RoboCop 2014. Alright, RoboCop 2014 Re-boot Edition. Alex Murphy is a cop who is injured by crime boss Antoine Vallon with a car bomb. Murphy is then selected for a RoboCop program that Omnicorps is putting on, making man into a machine in order to have a more robotic police force. At this time, they're using drones overseas, including the Ed-209s. But thanks to legislation, these drones are not allowed to operate within the states. So they create RoboCop, a man who is reborn from death and made into a cyborg to battle crime. But Murphy must battle the man and the machine in himself as he struggles to protect his family from the corrupt corporations that the world is now run by. So,
already off the bat, I think the synopsis for yours was far more detailed than the one for mine. So I kind of feel jealous.
Oh, don't feel jealous. I actually like your synopsis better than mine.
It's very straightforward and to the point, even though it's slightly flawed.
Well, is that because of me or is it because of the movie itself?
I blame IMDb.
Ooh, okay. Sorry, guys.
Just kidding. We love you. Sponsor us, please.
Yeah. Anyways, the entire movie is dealing with rather different themes than the original movie.
Well, it actually gives you a date that it's set in. It's actually set in the year 2028.
Yes. And the whole ambiance about it, too, is like, you know how back in the original film there were commercials and a news report going on. And in this, they're still the same thing. But they have Samuel L. Jackson,
who's tired of these mother effing robots
Yep.
and this mother effing conflict.
Yep, there it is. But he plays this sort of Bill O'Reilly during this entire film. And
Bill O'Reilly, I guess it's, you can almost push it to even a John Daly.
Yeah. It's but the
Or
whole,
Stephen Colbert. It seems that he kind of keeps some comedic undertone to what he's saying, even though it's quite serious.
Yeah, it is very quite serious. But at the same time, he's trying to push for an agenda. Like, why aren't we using these drones in the States? Has America truly lost its way into trying to combat the forces of evil here in our homeland? And it's called the Novak element. That's what the show is called. And that's why I say Bill O'Reilly, because the O'Reilly factor. So,
Indeed.
and that's exactly the image that they're trying to portray there. So there are a lot of similarities to this. Like one being the most obvious is the suit that he's placed in at the very beginning. It looks almost exactly like the original.
It's more so the reflection of the original due to the color scheme of his armor, which they happen to change shortly into the film.
Let's make him more tactical.
Exactly. Let's make him more tactical, make him more sleek. Let's make him black.
Yeah.
And it's funny that his partner Lewis actually refers to that later on and says, "Well, at least I know you're finally the right color."
Yeah, that's right.
So, considering the change
Oh my God.
in Lewis's character from a female back in the 80s to a black male in 2028 is
it's quite the statement,
quite the statement.
especially during today's troublesome times with the African American group in America, as well as the police, and how there are sides now. There are a whole bunch of politics going on, and it surprised me that this film came out 2 years ago, before all of this nonsense started happening, and it's kind of like the way of acknowledging that we've all sorted it out then by 2028, in a way.
I sure hope so.
I sure hope so too. But there was also, how they're using all the drones, the man robotic drones. I forget the name of those, but then there are the Ed 209s there, and they're all being used in the Middle East, which is
They're already in production. They're already already approved for government contracts, as compared to the original movie that was still under debate. It was still trying to get this.
They're being used. They're being used in the war in the Middle East, which 2028 still going on. Come on. But I guess for artistical purposes, they decide to mirror what's going on in present day form and try to hit some of the more nerves that we have against overseas war.
And the thing that you have to think about is that this is actually, sitting here, it's got about the right amount of time for technology to catch up to it, for these processes to get approved for such use. So it's actually interesting to see, this cusp of, okay, well, we've got these robots sitting here patrolling, but what makes it so appealing? Because they have no emotions, they have no sense of humanity to sit here and make some sort of a judgment, which is the whole reason they decided to bring in RoboCop.
Well, yeah, the whole argument is, even today in real life, is the whole no more killing of American soldiers across seas. So that's why they use drones and robots and basically fight the war for us and just taking the human element all out of it. If you go into the States during that movie, you know, they don't want drones because they want the human element, in which they devise this plan of putting a human into the machine. Alex Murphy into RoboCop, which is ironic to say, considering, you know. But at the same time, that whole irony is like the basic premise of the entire movie. Now, the thing about this movie is they cut all the over-the-top satirical themes that made RoboCop RoboCop.
Indeed.
And that was probably its downfall, because that's what RoboCop was known for, just being so gratuitously overbearing and just saying, you know, let's fuck story, let's fuck everything else, and just make a film about blood and guts and explosions and go from there. And that is exactly what they made. That's what the film is about. Now they went into more philosophical element, you know.
They decided to stray away from the satire that was expected in the original series, and they
put more dramatic feel to it.
More of a straightforward sort of feeling in most parts of it. You know, they did add their comedic elements here and there with certain things like playing.
It's very subtle, though.
Playing "If I Only Had a Heart" during this training session.
Yep.
But taking away that satire and giving it more straightforward feel definitely changes the pace. It gives it a little bit more of a more upbeat sort of pace.
It does. And because of that, though, it really loses its soul from the original, unfortunately. And
It's given life due to the fact that we sit here and we see a
wait a minute. Did RoboCop just become RoboCop all over again? Did it get resurrected?
American Jesus.
Resurrected! American Jesus resurrected!
The biggest thing about this movie is the fact that you go from the original RoboCop series of a man being killed and then becoming a robot and finding out that it still has the memories of a man, that it's still partially a man, to a man that's blown apart under the impression that he's still 100%, and then all of a sudden wakes up from a dream to realize he's in a living nightmare, trapped in this robotic form. The thing that they really managed to push well with this movie is the fact that he does have human bits to him. They don't really show it in the first RoboCop movie. Nope. They start to reveal it a little bit in the future movies, but we're not going to touch those. Just because they got a little too over the top, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're sticking to the basic storyline of the original movie versus this 2014 remake. But you actually see the devastation of this tragedy, and you know, he himself was witness to just how much is truly left of him.
For those of you who haven't seen the movie, Alex...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Alex is woken up by the scientist that's working on him, and he demands to be shown what is left of him. So piece by piece of the robotic suits moved away, and this is what really, got to me. You know, this is what really gave me goosebumps, because they just piece by piece, and as you see these pieces being pulled away from him, you know, you see him just saying, "Oh my God, there's nothing left. Oh my God, there's nothing left." And it was just a head with organs and a right hand. That was it. And you were...
A spinal column.
Yeah.
Some lungs.
Yeah.
A heart.
And that was it.
An esophagus. Part of the brain.
Horrifying. Like, you wake up from a dream state into a nightmare. It's
almost
terrifying.
Like finding out that you're truly Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah. Yeah, but oh my God. I think that was the biggest scene that stuck out to me in the entire movie. And to me, it just haunts me to this day. You know, it really captures the feel of what today's soldiers have to deal with.
Indeed.
When wounded in combat, and then waking up in the hospital and finding that you're
extremity missing.
Yeah.
And you see that when he's fully revived and they have him out and able to move. He's sitting there going, "This all feels so real." I can't believe how, I can't believe this is real because I can feel all of this. And she points out the fact of phantom leg syndrome for amputees, and that's when he starts to snap and realize the true devastation that's happened, and begins to go into a panicking mode that sets him on his creator and eventually has him fleeing the quote-unquote castle, which happens to be in Japan.
Yeah, that's interesting how they did that. One of the things that really stick out in this movie compared to the other is the involvement of Murphy's family. His wife and his kid they have more of a plot in this film than the original.
Correct. And they do have their point in the original movie where they are basically helping him find out that he is truly Murphy because these memories lie deep in his subconscious.
Yeah, and that was through subconscious memory form. But the wife and son are both there, trying to help him deal with it as he's dealing with it.
They realize that it's actually... the thing you have to realize is that your synopsis was sitting here saying that he was actually dead when he's been alive the whole time. Mm-hmm. They've just been sitting here altering him and basically keeping him under a deep sedation. Whereas the original one, he flatlines and they reconstruct him. They basically use an empty shell to sit here and make their creation.
Yep.
So the fact that they have to seek approval from the wife in this movie definitely brings a feeling not only to the person that's affected by this travesty, but the people behind that character, the people behind Alex Murphy that are sitting here having to deal with the fact that he's basically a vegetable. You're going to have to do all this stuff for him, or you can sit here, give him to us, and we can basically give him new life. We can make him American Jesus.
Sounds like a really bad infomercial. Shake Weighty.
Yeah.
That was
Slap Chop, just
Shake Weighty.
Deadpool reference.
Yep. Oh, God. There's going to be plenty of those coming. Another big difference to this was Murphy was hurt by a car bomb instead of being shot by shotguns gratuitously. And I say gratuitously because I think the original movie's theme was all about over the top. Gratuitous, yeah. But yeah, he was blown up.
If only it was gratuitous nudity.
I guess in a way, if you're very morbid, just the organ shot is nudity, but okay, that's getting weird now. But yeah, he's blown up and he's not shot, and to me, I thought this was like more, I wouldn't say a better way, but kind of like a more appropriate way.
It was a quick way to sit here and say a major travesty has happened without having to go into those deep, dark depths of the satire of the original film.
Exactly, which they totally negated in this film. My only gripe about that was how perfect his face was after getting blown up.
Indeed.
Yeah, I guess cosmetic surgery to the face in 2028 is amazing. He doesn't even look plasticky. He looks, he doesn't look like any of these celebs who have had plastic surgery all over their face. It's just normal face,
Well, sometimes they say that the object closest to the point of detonation actually goes somewhat untouched. So,
I wouldn't know.
If that happened to be correct, and assuming that he's opening the door, if it's right there, then his face could, in fact, be somewhat intact.
Yeah.
You do only see certain parts of it, so...
Yeah. That is true.
And that was something that the original was able to do, was sit here. It almost looked like it was just skin stretched across a magnetic or a metallic skeleton.
Exactly. Another fun fact about this movie was Chris Pine who we all know as the new Captain Kirk now,
Yes.
was actually offered the role of RoboCop. Alex Murphy. And it's funny because if he did agree to it, then in Star Trek Into Darkness, we would have had 2 RoboCops in the movie. Because Pete Weller plays Admiral Marcus in that film. And so, if that happened, then 2 RoboCops in the Star Trek movie. How about that?
Well, keep an eye out, because 2017 we have RoboCops. I've not seen any sort of synopsis on it, but...
Or any previews or anything like that.
Just some information passed down from IMDb.
This was also the first RoboCop movie to be released in IMAX. Imagine the original in IMAX. That would be insane.
I want to see that now. See, you say that, and now I want to see it.
Yeah. Originally, this... Also, another fact about this movie was it had a budget of $60 million, but because they were pushing for more of a PG-13 instead of an R rating, that budget went up to $120 million. And the reason they did that was they wanted to get a more broader audience than ones who could only go into R movies. So they went down to
wanted
PG-13.
a family-friendly version.
Indeed.
And that's screwing with the format.
Well, it paid off in the end because they made $242 million worldwide. They doubled their budget. So I guess it's all about the money.
But is it truly worth it when you lose the heart and soul of the film? That therein lies the question for later.
Well, it's a lot of that bureaucratic mentality that Hollywood has, and how it's all about a money grab. Which is not a bad thing. I mean, we all want to eat and drive fancy cars and have big houses, but at the same time, you're killing the dream, man.
You're messing with the American Jesus.
Jesus.
What's wrong with you?
Yep, the New Testament of RoboCop. That's what I'm going to refer to this movie from now on. The New Testament,
yes.
RoboCop. Another fun fact, Edward Norton was offered the role of Dr. Norton, which was then given to Gary Oldman, which I thought was a great person to have. I mean, Gary Oldman, he is incredible in everything. He played Dracula, he played, he was in Dark
Commissioner
Knight, Commissioner Gordon, and he was in, of course, Harry Potter. Everyone loves Harry Potter.
He was in the movie Leon the Professional, playing a corrupt cop.
Oh, God. It's been forever since I saw that movie.
Oh, shame on you.
I know, right? Another fact. Paul Verhoeven hated this film because
I can't blame him.
he blamed Hollywood for the lack of fresh ideas. You know, it didn't hold true to his original vision, and so he didn't like it.
I can back him up on that point to a certain degree. The concept of his original dream has changed slightly since those times.
Yeah.
We're no longer really in the Reaganomics.
It's true. Yeah, that's exactly my mentality when I was rewatching RoboCop.
As much as I agree with him, the times have changed, so the vision had to change slightly. I think they were able to compensate pretty well with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, critics also called this version a dumbed down version of RoboCop. I
would agree to that. I hate to use this word, but it's got a Disneyfication behind it. It's got a very lightning mood.
Yeah, it really does. Like in the end, it's the whole family getting back together.
Exactly. It's basically sitting here going, big tragedies can happen, but in the end, everything can turn out okay. Mm-hmm. Whereas the original one had very much heartbreak with the fact that his family had moved on. His family had been told that he is dead, that they need to go on with their lives, and they move away. And in the second film, they end up stressing that even more because he tries to be a part of their lives, but they stress that that's a monster. That's something that keeps following us. It keeps haunting us. It's a ghost. Mm-hmm. Get it away from us. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one is basically sitting here going, oh, well, Daddy may be a tin soldier, but everything's okay now.
Well, here, something about the original that made me laugh, actually, was him Alex Murphy teaching his kid, or just showing his kid all his like gun moves and everything. You know, that whole cowboy mentality just added to the American Jesus.
More of a space cowboy or space cadet.
Yeah, well,
sort
and
of feeling.
That made me laugh. I was just like, oh my god, what is this, Gunsmoke?
But it's one of those things where, you know, it's one of those hidden themes in the movie. The original one had a very almost modernized Western to where this white knight rides into town and, you know, undergoes a great tragedy, but manages to come back and save the city.
Yeah. Well, that's like the premise of every superhero movie, but in a way.
Not always.
Well, not always. I mean, not Deadpool.
Exactly.
But yeah,
that's an anti-hero movie. We'll get into that some other
those.
time. Off the mic.
Two characters in this movie actually are derived from one name, Andre Norton, who is a science fiction author who was the first woman to win the Gandalf Grand Master Award for a fantasy series. She's famous for writing such books as Witchworld, Elven Bane, and The Time Traders. Now, when I read that, I was just like, the Gandalf Grandmaster Award? Is that like the KKK version?
I don't know. It kind of sounds more like You Shall Not Pass Beyond This Point.
Oh, nice.
So
that
I don't know if I'd actually want to win that. Just due to the fact that
she got that award because it's the peak of her career, and now everything after that, it's not gonna peak again. It could.
You never know.
I have no idea how that award goes.
It could be resurrected, like an American Jesus.
Oh, the New Testament. Back to the New Testament. Yeah,
the Book of Murphy.
The Book of Murphy. Oh my god! Wow. One thing I did like about this movie was they gave him a motorcycle, a really badass looking motorcycle, compared to the old Mercedes cop car.
They definitely upped the hardware with this movie.
Yeah.
The original movie, he only had his one gun that he was sitting there utilizing.
The Auto 9.
Whereas the new film, he's actually got a couple different options to where you see him, quote unquote, double fisting, sitting here going to town with these guns, which gives him a little bit more of a badass edge. But when you take away some of the other elements, it doesn't really do much for it. It was interesting though to find out the complicated process that they had between slowly taking away his humanity and sitting here, bringing the science behind it to sit here and say, well, technically, you know, he's in control up until it comes to combat time, and then the program takes over, so he's...
Yeah, because he was too sluggish.
Right.
He was too sluggish as human, so they had to, like, download the program into him and just get rid of his humanity.
So it definitely does a good job of updating the character to the point where it's sitting here going, technology has caught up with us to the point where we can be faster.
Right. Exactly.
And it shows that with the movements. It shows that with the speed, the agility that he has now as compared to the classic one where he's basically just a walking target that happens to make some slick moves here and there.
Mm-hmm. So, with that in mind, and all those facts, now that we know the Old Testament and the New Testament, let's compare them and how they did, like box officely. First of all, IMDb rating. The old one has a 7.5 out of 10 right now. The new one, 6.2. It's not too bad, I think, the differences between that. However, when it comes to Rotten Tomatoes, the original has an 88% fresh rating. Rotten Tomatoes for the new one has a 49%.
And I would have to agree with Rotten Tomatoes. This is not me. I enjoy both films. I enjoy the qualities that each one has. But, however, the classic one carries more more depth to it. It's one of those movies that it's classified as a sci-fi action movie, but
Right.
you can also see the drama hidden behind it. You can feel the heartache of the character. It's more relatable in a way.
Well, you thought the original one was had more in-depth feel to it.
Right. Even though it's a very hokey sort of film, even though it's a little bit over the top, it's also very relatable to sit here and see the character development and see this basic look into the unknown that was foreshadowing future events, that was sitting here saying, hey, this is where the world is going.
Right.
You don't really see that in the new one. It's basically sitting here going, this is what's happening now, so it's still going to be happening 14 years into the future.
Yeah, there wasn't any, like, development as far
Exactly.
as what can happen 14 years from now.
There was
at the
also-
time of that movie.
There was also a very, very set feeling in the original movie. The original movie had this feeling of the dystopia.
Yep.
It had a very sense of this world is not a good place to live in. It's a very dangerous place for you to be in, whereas the more modern one, when it comes to Detroit, the city can be just about anywhere. They don't make it specific to Detroit. They don't have references to the Tigers that they do in the original movie.
Right.
They do make reference to the Red Wings. So
Yep, that's right.
That's a good kind of like nod of the hat without nodding, but you can be in any city and root for the Red Wings. So the big issue with the newest one is that they weren't able to give you that sense of danger that the original one really had. The original one, just with the way that the world looked around them, it was kind of left you on the edge of your seat, sitting here going, I don't know if I want to be here. Whereas the new one, it's like, well, shoot, there's not very much happening there until RoboCop comes along. So.
Right. Like he's the center of the stage.
Right.
And everything else sucks until it gets to that point. So let's call the question then. Do you think the remake gets the reboot, or do you think it gets the boot?
I'd have to give it the boot.
Oh.
If I had these two set in front of me, I would definitely have to pick the original over the reboot. It speaks more to me, even though it's a movie that I grew up with. It's got more depth to it, and it's got more character about it. It's got more stuff to draw you in to sit here and keep watching and keep finding out what's going to happen. It's almost like every time you watch it is the first time you're watching it, especially if you happen to stay away from it for 5-10 years or so.
Exactly. And there's a certain end feeling to that film where, like, when I watched it again, I thought it was pretty dumb. Like, if I call the question to me, I think the remake gets the reboot in the end for me. Because there's just so much more of a modern feel that resonates with how I feel these days, that I truly believe that I think it can be it's a good thing. It's a good route that Hollywood can take with old franchises, but at the same time, a lot of the production value of the film tastes like chicken. Like, we have so many other movies that we already have that can already mimic that film that came out 7 years earlier, like Transformers when that came out, and even the music for RoboCop 2014 sounds like Transformers in a way. It's got that like chugging dramatic feel to it, like a train.
Well, after you get through all the lead up to that point of the classic theme, the classic theme, it just basically got straight to the point, and it's sitting here going, here, it's in your face, and all throughout the movie you can sit here and you can hear these dramatic scenes being amplified by the soundtrack behind it. You can almost feel his sorrow as he's sitting here going through his old house. Mm-hmm. You can be
like you can't go home again.
Right, you can be drawn into the character, whereas the new movie is sitting here saying, well, you may have been blown apart, you may be just like a head and a right hand.
But you're still human.
But you're still human.
I agree with that. I do feel like that's just not accurate. So
that's why we're having this show.
That's why we're having this show, to discuss these things, to agree and disagree, to agreeing or agreeing to disagree. All the above.
Let's agree to disagree.
Yep. Okay, sounds good. Well, anyways, that was Das Reboot, our RoboCop episode. What do we got next time for us?
Next on the docket, I believe we have the classic hit Batman.
Ooh, good old Batman.
So that one will be an interesting show, possibly longer than this podcast due to the fact that we may even dive back to the classic Adam West movie.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Jacoby.
I'm Zach Lyle.
And this has been Das Reboot. So if you've been moved by this episode, we'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear you via the social medias.
If you feel that we've made some mistake, if we've overlooked something, feel free to contact us via our
Facebook page, Das Reboot, or you can find us on Twitter at Das Reboot Podcast. Also, Zach, I'll point out something about the composer's name. His name is Basil Polidori.
My bad.
Actually, no, it can go with Riss as well. Polidorius. So,
okay.
Yep. But stuff like that. If you as a listener has something to point out and just make us look like total idiots and fools, we'd like to hear it. It'd be great.
But it's also our opportunity for Das Reboot Redemption.
The Das Redemption. All right, thank you again for listening to Das Reboot.